So talking about music in Odessa, from the beginning it was a city culture. So you can't say that it's a folk music of Odessa. It's always city music. Since Odessa has a port, they had the tavernas, they had music there, they had Greeks, so there was Greek music. They had Serbs, because in beginning of 19th century, where Serbs had a fight with Turks still, a lot of Serbs moved to the so-called the brothers, Southern Slavs. They were given land in new territories, and they even called it New Serbia. So there were a lot of Balkan people that moved there. So there were Serbs, there were Greeks, there were, of course, remnants of the Turks, there were Tartars in Crimea, there were all the different kind of Europeans. A lot of Italians came. Italians, they opened a big opera theater, looking like Scala. And they were doing the Italian opera in there. So they had an Italian opera company. They had all the Italian architects. They had a lot of Italian tradesmen. So it was very close connection with Italy. So you had all these influences that people combined into what people hear. So Odessa developed a particular kind of music also, what they played. In the same time that the bouzouki music appeared, in rebetiko, appeared in Greece from second part of 19th century. Also the music of the tavernas, of the public houses, houses of ill repute, dances, this kind of stuff. So they were, these influences, they combined with particular Odessa music. Most of the musicians were Jewish musicians because they came from the klezmer tradition. Gypsies and Jews in eastern part of Europe were the only professional musical clans. When I say professional, I'm talking about people that did nothing else. If the Jews didn't have enough work as musicians, on the side, sometime they could do little something else, like be a barber, for example. But their main occupation would be playing music. And if they would be good enough, that's what they would be doing. And it was a traditional family enterprise. They would go from father to son. They would organize all over Eastern Europe. Was like that. So it was the same in Poland. It was the same in Belarus. It was the same in Ukraine. The same down in Moldavia, in Bessarabia, in these areas of the south. In the areas of the south was also a large gypsy population. Gypsies, generally, the Rome people, had the very particular function in the society that now doesn't exist anymore. They were people that moved one place or another. Usually they had a trade in horses, trade in goods, and repairing the metal objects. They sharpened the knives, they made pots and pans, they fixed pots and pans, they did everything with horses. They also stole horses and resold the stolen goods, did all kinds of things. So they allowed them to move with purpose. They made their living by doing this. So when the gypsy camp would come, the village would not just worry that they will steal something, but they would actually use them for purpose. And in this gypsy camp would be professional musicians that would also play. So the professional musicians would be gypsies and would be the Jews. Because all the other society would be noble people that, of course, would not play for money. They would maybe sometime would study in a conservatory somewhere, but most of them would not. They would need for entertainment somebody to come. So usually in the castles of Polish nobility, they would always invite Jews to play. And they had a special repertory to play. For the non-Jews, they would play the popular dances of the time. So all the tunes, since these people played by ear, they would learn very quickly. They would learn the tune, and then they would play the tune for the dancers. So they would play all the Polish dances, mazurkas, valses, polonaise, krakowiak, all the various dances would be done, and most of the time they would play by the Jewish bands, what now would be called klezmer bands. And then they would play Jewish weddings. Music for Jewish wedding is very different, because for Jewish wedding, the main reason of having music for Jewish wedding is to accompany the ceremony, to make people cry, because the ceremony is something that is a very, very important in Jewish religion also. So that's why a lot of things that were done for the Jewish wedding would be based on the intonation and texts. They would have to imitate instrumentally the texts and the way of performing of the synagogue recitative, the chazanut. So that was one main influence. That's how Jewish music would be distinguished from, say, dance music. Then they played, for dances, they could play a lot of dances of the area. So they would play Kazachok, which is a Cossack dance. They would play all kinds of Polish dances. They also would have particular Yiddish dances that are a little slower, so that it would allow, since to dance in a wedding is a mitzvah, it's an obligation. So everybody had to dance in a wedding, so that they would have to do dances that would be somehow not so fast. Usually, if you listen to this, particularly Jewish dance, would be derived from, would have intonations, would have the scale of this other Jewish music, of the Jewish lament, of the Jewish prayer, of the Hasidic nigun, because the Hasidic sect based their religious practices on a song. Creation of these melodies that would be kind of direct way to God. And so that's called nigun. And it's done in a certain way. It's done for ecstatic purposes. Like for Sufis, the Sufi music, you repeat and repeat and repeat and get into the ecstatic. So the Jewish instrumental music became a mixture of all of that, plus influence of Jewish folk song. Of course, we have Yiddish folk songs like any other people. It's created over the centuries, the words with the melody. Yiddish language, they say it's around 12th century dialect of German, Southern German dialect, from around 12th, 13th century. Mixed with, of course, moving east, they took a lot of different influences. You hear from the Yiddish folk song that I know from Ukrainian period, so I would say it's from 1600s on, 16, 17, 1800s. And these melodies usually modal. They usually have influenced the same kind of influences from the synagogue recitative, Ukrainian song, Ukrainian Duma. Yiddish song and Ukrainian song influence each other somehow, because we have very similar modes. In Ukraine, strangely enough, they have what they call Ukrainian mode, Ukrainian scale, which is a very similar to the Yiddish scale, which absolutely does not exist in the Russian folk music. So it could be also, all of it could be influenced by the Turkish, because the closest culture that was there was Turkish culture. So the scale, ta di 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 da di da di da di dam, la ti ta ti ra, la di di ti ra ya, la da da ta. That is the scale, what they call the augmented Doric scale. It's this Ukrainian scale, which used in Dumas and used in huge amount of Yiddish, tragic Yiddish songs, and in klezmer music.